waiting to speak, and he knows he can't. And you've got to be kind of waiting. You know, the Prime Minister's there, the Archbishop of Canterbury's there, the world is listening, thousands of people are there, and the thing between you and them are about 12 steps. He must have been terrified. And we learn later in the film kind of maybe some of the causes behind the stammer, the stutter, that it's emotional trauma that he's been through that causes that. And he's putting himself in a situation where that emotional trauma is being retaught almost because of the things he's put into. It's just a thing of nightmares, I'm sure, for him. For his family, you see the way his wife, who obviously we would know as the Queen Mother, she's almost speaking for him. She's just desperate for him to be able to do what he's been called to do by his father. Obviously his brother has already made a speech on the radio and it all went terribly well, which obviously even then increased the pressure on him, and it just must have been awful. The reason I put on the table is, what is your worst nightmare, your worst fear? Obviously for him it was public speaking. You know, you can imagine the fear that must be going through him every time he has to meet people and speak publicly. And the reason I kind of asked that question is because as a child I was crippled with shyness. How I ended up in front of people with a microphone, I don't know, it can only be God. But as a young boy, I put here a chubby young boy, you can't imagine that, I would never walk over to a group at school and speak to them. I would never put myself in a situation where I had to speak first. I was all right responding, but I would never speak first. The fear of ridicule, the fear of rejection was too big. I always felt like an imposter in every group I was kind of trying to be part of, very similar to that. He never quite felt that he was part. Later on in time, when he becomes king and he's got to do more and more, he says, all I am is a military man. I'm not anything to do with royalty. That's where I feel safe. And I suppose for me, I always felt safe on my own. At my 8th birthday party, with a small group of equally socially awkward young people, I burst into tears and hid behind the sofa just because they sang happy birthday. I didn't want them to look at me, sing at me, be nice to me, because it's not where I felt safe. I was always mortified of being the centre of attention. When I went to secondary school, things didn't really improve. I was in a class, went to Foxford School, not far from here. I was in a class of very clever Asian boys and girls, a group of highly popular, trendy white kids, a very scary, loud Jamaican girl, me and a boy named Chris. My shyness excluded me from the whole group. The Jamaican girl terrified me. If you think in today's world, Alison Hammond, after far too many coffees, you know, she was very enthusiastic, used to terrify me. Most of the time the Asian boys would be arguing over cricket and maths and which of them were in the highest caste tension were most important. And the cool kids were just too cool. Which left me and Chris, kind of a pair of dorky kids who didn't know how to carry on. But I clicked with Chris, because like me, he didn't naturally fit into the other groups. The difference being, he didn't care. He just simply plodded on his own path and just didn't bother what anybody else wanted, whether he wanted to fit in or not, he would never bother. Chris made me laugh, made me feel comfortable, accepted. Chris, for me, made school bearable. Chris was my friend, and we found out, like, well, I'll tell you a bit more about him later, but he was the reason I kind of survived school. In the first session of the King's Speech we've just seen, we're introduced to Bertie, better known as Prince Albert, the Duke of York, second in line to the throne. I wonder whether he really ever actually expected to become king. He probably looked at the line of succession and thought, it's okay, my brother, they'll have kids. No, okay. Construction. They'll have kids, it'll mean I won't have to be king. But he was a man with great power and authority, but he was shackled, tied up with massive fear and doubt. A man destined to be visible to the world, heard by millions, crippled by something unseen. until he opened his mouth. And the film tells us of a relationship between Bertie, Prince Albert, and an Australian guy called Lionel Logue, a speech therapist. And it's a story of friendship. You know, we've seen royalty, some of us have met royalty, and you all become very kind of tongue-tied, and you kind of treat them like they're something different, something special. But Lionel Logue treats him like a friend. He levels the playing field. Lionel insists on calling the Duke Bertie, to remove all the grandeur, the formality, the power. And for a little bit at the start, Bertie doesn't like that. Bertie quite likes being on that pedestal of being different and being too important to be interfered with. But in this situation, they were equals. It wasn't master and servant, and it helped create a friendship. The story covered in the film is actually spread over 14 years, but none of them ever age. You'll see later in other clips, you'll see Elizabeth and Margaret, their children, who obviously Elizabeth becomes queen. But throughout those 14 years, they still stay the same age because they're trying to tell a story of friendship rather than it being 100% historically correct. The guy that wrote the screenplay had a stutter and a stammer. So he understood what the story really meant. Apparently he wrote to the Queen Mother and said, I want to write this story about your husband, but I want your permission. And the Queen Mother, even into her 90s and later, was still so traumatised by what the family had been through. She said, please don't write it until after I died. And he honoured that. He didn't know she was going to live another 20 years. So it wasn't until he was in his early 70s himself that actually got to tell the story. So this is just an indication of some of the things we have in our own lives, those nightmares, those things that hold us back. And throughout the Bible, God appears, choose those people, the marginalised, the weak, the scared, the vulnerable, those who think they can't, or for those who others think they won't be able to do the things of God. We see characters literally run away rather than face their fear and do what God is calling them to do. But nearly in every situation, God intervenes. In the story of Jeremiah in the Old Testament, we see a man who has been chosen by God, but immediately is fearful about his ability to serve. He says this, the word of the Lord came to me saying, before I formed you in the womb, I knew you. Before you were born, I set you apart. I appointed you as a prophet to the nations. And then it goes, this is Jeremiah. Alas, sovereign Lord, I do not know how to speak. I am too young. But the Lord said to me, do not say, I am too young. You must go to everyone I send you to and say whatever I command you. Do not be afraid of them, for I am with you and I will rescue you, declares the Lord. Then the Lord reached out his hand and touched my mouth and said to me, I have put words in your mouth. See, today I appoint you over nations and kingdoms to uproot and tear down, to destroy and overthrow, to build and to plant. Even someone kind of key in the stories of the Bible, to get in the Bible, was fearful, but God can overcome. And that's what we can trust as Christians. Whenever we feel weak, God can make us strong. And we just have to trust in him. In our weakness, God can create transformation. As I said at the beginning, I cannot believe that 8-year-old boy who wouldn't say boo to a goose gets to stand in front of people at the cathedral or in front of you and speak. Jeremiah didn't believe in himself, but God did. Do not be afraid, for I am with you, is the underlying message from God. That's what he promised him, and it's what he promises us. Lionel, the speech therapist, believed in Bertie. But the only way he could get to him was by him being Bertie, not by him being prince, not by him being royalty. They had to be equals. That belief, we'll see in a little while, eventually brings about transformation because of a friendship, because of trust. When I look back at the 8-year-old me, as I say, I cannot believe that transformation happened. I believe God had a lot to do with it. but so did the support of Chris. That young boy that I probably met him when I was 6 or 5, and we're still friends now. That friendship, I thought, was one way. I spoke to him later in time and said, you know, it's amazing when you got through school. And he said, well, I only got through it because of you. I thought I only got through it because of him. I found out when I was about 18, 19, that he'd actually spent most of his school career copying me. He said, if I didn't sit next to you, I don't think I'd have got any GCSEs at all. And I said, well, if you were copying me, how come your results are worse than mine? He said, because I'm not copying very well. But he said that actually sitting next to me, that support of a friend got him through school. And all of that I don't care persona was all a mask. And actually on the days that I was off sick, he struggled. And on the days I was off sick, he struggled. But I know now that actually the thing that keeps me going is the friendship of people, but that friendship from God, that support, that belief from God that I can do it. He's put me in a place where he wants me to be. The difference is Jesus. While I still battle shyness, social anxiety, imposter syndrome today, I know when God calls me to serve, I'm not going to be alone. The family might be there, friends might be there, but God is always there. I spoke at a church in Ireland years ago, and I arrived and it was a massive church. Could probably seat 300-400 people. And we were there on a day when there was a big football match happening. There was a special event in Ireland happening. And I thought, great, there's not going to be many people here. And it's that thing that we all do when we go to church. Everybody arrives right at the last minute. So when I'm sitting there waiting at the front with the vicar and everybody else, probably about 30 people there. It's all nice, just sit there quietly. As first hymn starts, do that. And I haven't turned around. And the vicar says, right, I'm going to welcome Darren. Darren, will you go up into the pulpit? Oh, what? He said, I want you to preach from the pulpit. Everybody, this is Darren. And as I walked up the pulpit, and it goes higher and higher, and I popped out the top, it felt like that moment at Wembley Stadium we were just seeing. There was about 250 people there. And yeah, I felt the same as he did. But in 2 or 3 seconds I calmed down and realised that God had put me there. And actually it went really well. But we just need to trust that whatever we're fearful of, we're not alone. We can put our trust in God. We can ask God for support, for help. And actually sometimes that friendship, that relationship with God is what can get us through. I feel stronger when I'm kind of at the weakest moment because I can lean on God and it changes everything. Right, we're going to watch, hopefully, another clip now. It's a little bit longer clip. This is at the end of the film. Are we all right, Remy? This is the end of the film after all the stuff's happened and we see the difference.